Welcome to This Isn't Working, the podcast for employers and employees who think it's time to talk about the failings of workplace culture and how we can do better. I'm your host, Tanya de Grunwald, an HR commentator who's watching, listening, and hopefully asking the right questions. Okay, let's get this working. Hi, everybody. This is the third and final part of my trilogy interview with Neil Morrison, Group HR Director at the British water company Severn Trent. In this episode, we look at how employers should assess and fix damage done to their organisation through bad practice that has crept in the name of diversity, equity and inclusion. I grilled Neil about how we've got to a point where senior DEI professionals are silencing dissent and questions from their colleagues and openly pushing their own political agenda in the workplace, all while insisting they're being, in quotes, inclusive. I thought Neil made some really interesting points about how employers rush to look progressive against an increasingly complex and heated social and political landscape has pushed them to quickly fill new heads of DEI roles with people who had lots of charisma and ideas, but perhaps not enough sound judgment or business experience. Another thing that struck me was his relaxed attitude to media criticism and the prospect of the UK's DEI industry shrinking. In fact, I thought he almost seemed to welcome the current phase of overexcitement and overreach coming to an end. You'll hear I got a bit stressed out with him at one point, not my finest moment, but he handled it well. I apologised, and we ended the call agreeing that robust conversations like this are vital in order to move us all forward. If you missed the previous parts of this interview, check out episodes 6 and 7. And if you're a senior HR professional looking to brainstorm solutions with peers who share your concerns around these issues, do get in touch with me via LinkedIn. We're building a community of switched-on HR professionals keen to return to a common-sense approach to allow you to do your best work and move your organisation forward positively and confidently. Okay, I'll stop talking. Here is the final part of my interview with Neil Morrison, Group HR Director at Severn Trent. Okay, so we've covered sort of how you think DEI has lost its way. We talked about DEI and the law. And we've touched on staff networks and training. But before we wrap up with solutions and reflections, I'd like to ask you a bit about what I would loosely call DEI people. So that's heads of DEI, their teams, DEI champions within HR or kind of senior champions. It's become clear to me, I think, for the last sort of 2 years or so that a backlash was brewing against DEI. Yet I've been really struck by the industry's allergy to any kind of challenge. And instead of engaging with criticism, they seem to double down. So on LinkedIn particularly, I see heads of DEI promoting what seem to be their own personal political views and using, frankly, quite divisive and political language, like things like anti-woke, anti-trans, bigot, racist, things like that, which I actually find quite surprising for people in that role. And actually some quite senior people have blocked me on LinkedIn for raising what I think can only be described as reasonable, polite questions. Other people, heads of DEI particularly, have taken to, I've noticed, limiting who can comment on their posts. So it's only their pre-approved connections. And then they'll say things like, I don't accept hate on my feed and things like that. And so this feels to me like a profession that's kind of building a bit of a bunker for itself. And so that's just from my perspective as an outsider, as a kind of commentator who's just kind of watching this. Employees within organisations, having seen what I'm doing, are now getting in touch with me to tell me that they're facing a similar sort of behaviour from their DEI colleagues in the workplace. And this is kind of across all sectors. So not just the corporate world, everywhere. So people are being challenged for using certain words at work. So a designer I know was ticked off for using the words urban and curve in her presentation. And actually she left shortly after that because she just got such a horrible, she didn't, she used those words without any loading, she felt, and she just kind of got ticked off for that. And so, she didn't take the employer to court, she just left. And so people are being shamed for raising reasonable questions and objections to policies and other internal and external initiatives. And I think probably when they see other people being disciplined, they think, well, I'm not going to do that because I've seen what happened to that person. So we've talked about before about how people are just kind of shutting up. And I think that we're told that these people, it's a bit galling, if I'm honest, it's a bit galling that these people are telling us that they're creating a place of inclusion, But actually, it feels to a lot of people like the opposite if you happen to have a problem with any of it. And in fact, they're actually creating a culture of sort of fear and silencing. Do you think DEI people are part of the problem? And is it the heads of DEI and that culture coming from them into their team? There seems like some very big personalities in some places, very divisive and emotive topics. We see this sort of lived experience has become weaponized as a way to keep people quiet if they dare to challenge it. Does any of this ring bells to you? Sorry, I feel like I have been quite tough, but that's what I'm hearing, and I think it's important that we address it.
So there's a couple of things I'd say. Start by saying there's lots of professionals doing really, really good work, right? And they're probably not the ones you ever see or ever hear from. They are working in their organisations, making more inclusive organisations every single day, doing really, really good stuff. And I think we should really recognise that, because sometimes you can get judged by the loudest voices rather than the people who are actually doing the really good work. I think part of this conversation is starting to engage with that population. And I spent 8 years in publishing, and one of the things that I always said to people was, just because you love books doesn't make you a good publisher, but good publishers all love books. And I think it's very, very similar with D&I professionals. Just because you're passionate about the topic doesn't necessarily make you a really good D&I professional within an organisation, because what you're trying to do is drive systemic change. And doing that is about understanding all the levers and all the points within an organisation where you need to try and improve things or make them better.
Can I just ask you one question? You said drive systemic change. You meant within the organisation, correct? Not within the world. That I think is really crucial. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, within your organisation. So what are the challenges that your organisation is facing, and how do you change the organisational system to address some of those challenges? Right. That's very, very different to social policy or coming in with a very strong view about the external world that you're bringing inside. And so I think, unfortunately, there are a number of particularly vocal voices within the profession who sit in that latter camp. So they're not necessarily the sort of people that are skilled in large-scale change programs within organisations, which effectively is what we're talking about. They are skilled in having an opinion and expressing it, very eloquently often, but that's not the sort of thing that actually makes change happen in organisations. And when you conflate the two, I think that's when it becomes problematic for people, because you end up with almost campaigning inside organisations rather than the kind of change that we're talking about. And so I definitely see that, and I can imagine if you saw that within your organisation, that would feel probably quite uncomfortable. But I don't think it should overshadow the great work that lots of people are doing who are just quietly going about improving their organisations little bit by little bit, increasing the representation of women within the workforce, making it more friendly to people who are neurodiverse, a whole range of things that are going on, but without maybe the noise that comes from some of the other voices.
Yeah, the problem is though that it is overshadowing the good work, because it's become so obvious that something's gone wrong that's why I've been raising it for such a long time. And I'm not anti-DEI. I am pro all the good stuff that we're doing. But I think if we don't address it properly, my fear has always been that it will tank the whole thing, all the good stuff that we do as well. And I feel like that has not been recognised properly, and that's not been acknowledged, and it's certainly not. I don't see any work being done among any of these people to reflect. Maybe they're quietly reflecting, but that's not what I'm hearing from the people that are on the receiving end of this stuff. And I'm wondering, are you saying that have these people just misunderstood the nature of their role? Have they just like not read the brief? Were they brought in? Do they think they've been brought in as the conscience of the company, and we all want to know what they think, and we look to them for moral leadership? Does that and do they think they've been hired to help the organisation to make the world a better place? How are they unclear about what their own remit is?
I think some of the difference is that there's one thing to be able to talk eloquently about the change that needs to happen, and there's another thing about being able to make change happen. And so, if you are spending time in conferences, talking, presenting, I could see how that would be appealing to an organisation looking at an individual and thinking that sort of person will be able to make my organisation more diverse or more inclusive, because it feels like an easy answer. Whereas when they come into the organisation, what you're actually needing to do is probably a totally different thing. So if I see myself in being in service of my workforce and in service of the communities that we serve. So how I make my organisation better is to make it better for my workforce and for the communities that they serve, not for a social or political purpose. And I think, therefore, are they coming in with that brief? Potentially not. I think, are they coming in with a brief that says, how do we make an other organisation look like it is a leader in this space? Maybe. And that then drives a whole range of different behaviours, which are more about, I suppose, making a name, making a noise, making a publicity than it is necessarily doing the quiet hard yards that are the things that you need to do. And the other thing I'd say is I don't think it is overshadowing in some ways, because good culture, good organisational culture is done for the people who work there. So people talking loudly on LinkedIn doesn't change most people's experience of their workplace. But I think what it does do is it creates an unnecessary contribution to the public debate around things like diversity and inclusion, which can then impact that. So I think it's nuanced.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I suppose those people would say that they are serving their workforce. But they are particularly serving the members of their workforce that they perceive to be marginalised, over the members of the workforce that they don't perceive to be marginalised. So I think they do have a sense of duty. And I actually don't see any malice in a lot of what they're doing at all. I agree with you. But I do think that some of the decisions they're making are showing their own personal biases against certain groups and for certain groups. And in terms of the nature of the backlash, I don't think it's just on LinkedIn. And at the start of this, it was a lot of eye rolling and, Daily Mail and Kemi Badenoch and Suella Braverman and all these people. But I think now it is much bigger than that. There's a huge scene, particularly the more kind of right wing, but centre right. A lot of these people are centre right kind of YouTubers and podcasters, and there's Free Speech Union doing a lot of work around this. There's Trigonometry, there's Andrew Gold. This is a huge number of people now talking about this stuff, and even on things like things like Spectator, Unheard, Spiked. A lot of those channels have become really, really popular because something is chiming with them, and they really, really don't like DEI. And I listen to all that stuff, and I think some of that's a bit harsh. Where is the DEI industry? Where are the HR people defending DEI? Where is any sign that we are? I don't think anybody from DEI is listening to any of those. I think I'm probably the only person that is. Not that I'm really from DEI. I guess I'm DEI adjacent. But I think that the scale of the opposition to DEI as a whole, people want to get rid of the whole thing. They are really, really angry about it. And I think it's the bad practice. As you said, I think the bad practice is just kind of poisoning the whole conversation. But the fact that we're not engaging with the criticism is the problem, I think.
But if you talk about getting rid of the whole thing, someone have to tell me what the whole thing is, right? So because ultimately it isn't a thing. It's a myriad of small pieces that are going across an organisation, and organisations that are doing that well don't necessarily need to package it as a whole thing. And I think that's the kind of that's what people dislike. It's the kind of branding as a big force in itself that feels that it's kind of trying to do to people, right? So if you said to most people, if you have two equally talented people going for 10 jobs, one is female and one is male, one would expect that 5 times out of 10, the woman would get the job, and 5 times out of 10, the man would get the job with exactly the same history background. Most people would go, yeah, that's fine. If you said it was 10 times that the man got it, most people, even the people who are saying they dislike DEI, would go, well, that feels a bit wonky, doesn't it? So that's not what people are objecting to. What they're objecting to is the social policy side, the idea that I'm going to tell you what you can say and think, and I'm going to try and overstretch beyond the workplace. And I think those criticisms are valid, and I think that's probably why you don't see lots of HR directors stepping in to defend that, because it's quite a hard place to go into. Whereas I think lots of people will defend, as I say, making the workplace more accessible for people with physical disabilities, for example. I don't think anyone objects to that.
Yeah, I agree. Those are the points that I make in defence of DEI, but I find myself being a lone voice. And frankly, I'm not paid to do this. And I'm the bit like, where the hell is everybody else, frankly? I'm the one taking the hits here. I'm the one saying, actually, we've done really good stuff on social mobility, on disability. A lot of the race stuff is good. A lot of the gender stuff is good. I'm the one defending it, and I just don't know where everybody else is. And I think, I agree. I think we're stronger when we talk about things like what we're measuring, how the social mobility outreach programs work. If you don't do anything, that you're just going to get this group of people are going to apply and they're going to do the best in the recruitment process, because I know more about early careers than any other bit of this. And I think that's a really clear way where you can say, if you don't do any outreach to these different schools, to these different young people, if you don't make it clear that they are welcome and all this kind of stuff and give them extra ways to build their confidence along the way, they will not do well in this assessment. But it's not because they weren't the best person for the job. They were probably better than some of the people who you ended up giving the job to. So we're trying to find the best people, but some people need a bit of extra in order to be able to get extra confidence. Not extra. We don't give them extra points, but I'm the one doing all the demystifying because I know enough about it. But frankly, I don't know why I'm doing that on my own. Anyway, listen, I'm ranting at you. You're not the right person for me to rant at. You're an ally. not that's a bit of an iffy word as well. We'll come back to that. But, I don't want to give you a hard time. I guess I found someone to vent at, so I'm going to do it. Sorry,
That's
Neil.
Perfectly okay. It's all part of the job. It goes with my role.
You've handled me very well because I'm just having a bit of a rant. So, but yeah, I appreciate that may be a slight point of difference, but I think we are coming from the same place. And I just think we need to engage more and shout more about the good stuff that we're doing and what we're doing and what we're not doing. And I think people don't like the social engineering bit. But then I have to keep saying we don't have quotas in the UK. We have targets. This is the difference between them. We don't have positive discrimination, we have positive action. This is the difference between it. But where is everybody else? Why am I doing this on my own?
So, to a certain extent, I would say because, not why you're doing it on your own, but if you're asking me where my primary focus is my primary focus going to be to try and tone down the loud voices on DE&I that I disagree with in both extremes? Or is my focus going to be creating a better organisation for the 10,000 people that we employ? It's a really, really clear answer for it. So, I think what you've got is a lot of people who probably aren't heard and aren't seen who are just cracking on and making better organisations. If you look at, for example, female representation in boardrooms and in the excos as measured by that, as was the Hampton Alexander, there's been significant progress in that space. People have just been cracking on and doing that.
What did
We're
you say
also
just then?
seeing
Sorry, I didn't understand what you just said just then. The excos and the, what did you say? Hampton.
boards and executive committees. So female representation at a senior level within organisations has improved considerably over the last sort of 10 years or 15 years, because people have been getting on and just delivering that. If you look at social mobility and the work that organisations are doing in terms of improving social cohesion, the State of the Nation report by the Social Mobility Commission has been recently published, the most recent one. People are just getting on and doing that. So it's like there's a different game being played on a different field somewhere else where people are making better organisations. And then there's another game being played, which is the kind of social policy versus freedom of speech versus kind of culture wars debate that's going on alongside. And I think the two things get conflated, but I don't actually think in many cases they're the same. And they get conflated, coming back to your question, because often people who are in that then get hired into organisations and are then seen as their voice is representing a brand as well. Whereas there's lots of people who are just doing the work.
So you're sort of saying that it's nobody's job to be defending DEI to the public, to the press, to anybody criticising it. Like, whose job would that be? Is that it's not an HR director's job to do that. So who would do that?
What I'm saying is, I think that D&I as it's packaged is a false concept because it doesn't actually exist. What exists are a whole series of practices that make organisations more diverse and more inclusive, and the packaging it up into a thing which consultants do so that they can then sell that thing, and people do because they can then have conferences on and talk about it, is a distraction from the real work. That's so it's similar to culture, if you like, or employee experience, or there's a whole range of different terms which aren't actually a thing. They're just a badge for a series of other pieces of work. And so how do you defend something that actually isn't real? If you're asking people to defend women's rights, that's something that you'll get people standing up and speaking out on. If you ask people to defend, I don't know, socioeconomic mobility, people will speak out on that, and I do on a regular basis. But as a concept on diversity and inclusion, it's a package of a whole range of different things.
Yeah, okay, I accept that. I just think one of the problems is that DEI is a thing for people that don't like it, and the fact that it's that perception that it's a thing, and I have all these. A lot of people think it's a Marxist plot. I mean, I don't think it's a Marxist plot. I think it's a lot of people who think they're doing something good and have taken their eye off the ball and let it go wrong. And I think there's not been enough guardrails around it. I don't see it as a Marxist plot, but a lot of people do. And so what they're saying is that there's this great conspiracy, but there's nobody to defend it. And I think the fact that it's not a thing is working against us, because there's not a united kind of union of us, if you like, saying, well, actually some of this stuff is good. So, and maybe it's just sort of no one's job to do it, I guess.
I think one of the things I've seen over the last 30 years of doing this is there are flashpoints where diversity or inclusion or EDI, whatever you want to badge it, where it becomes more prevalent in people's minds. And it becomes a debate, and then you see a cycle where organisations say, "Oh, we're going to, it's everybody's responsibility. So we're just going to integrated in the whole of the organisation, and it dissipates for a while. And then it comes back as a thing, normally because of an external event. The actual activities never stop behind the scenes in terms of making, engaging in early years recruitment and making sure that you're reaching out to different communities as part of that, or making adjustments to your working practices for people with caring responsibilities, or people with either physical or neurological disability. So I think it's probably not just current, it's the long history of diversity that it becomes a political football when people try and make it a campaign. And actually, the simple way to get stuff done in most situations is not to campaign it, but just quietly get on and make stuff better.
Yeah. I don't know. We're going to see how it goes in the next few months, because I think the anti-DEI campaign is certainly cohesive and loud. And if there's nothing on the other side of it, then, it's us versus Matt Walsh and Piers Morgan, and, it's not looking good for us.
Okay. Yeah, but just follow that through. So let's say they win. What happens? Tell me what difference that makes if they win.
Well, I just see the whole thing losing credibility overnight, and it then becomes more difficult for people that want to do the good bits of it to be able to do those bits, because it's just been discredited and just become a bit of a joke, to be honest. And the people have lost credibility, and the work has lost credibility. And it's like, do you remember that embarrassing thing that we let happen?
But do you think people will recruit fewer women?
I don't know.
I guess my point being is it doesn't actually change something, because it's a fight about a concept that doesn't actually exist. So everything comes down to legal basis and organisational practice. And so, in reality, this is like one of those virtual worlds where a war is going on in this virtual world between two forces, but actually none of it bears any semblance to reality, in my view, because people will still be looking to create more diverse organisations by hiring the best people. People will still be looking to make more inclusive organisations and better cultures in order to drive performance. They just maybe won't be engaging in some of the kind of sideshow of social policy and statements of direction, which doesn't actually do anything anyway in terms of creating a better society.
So you'd be quite relaxed about the whole thing either collapsing or taking a new shape, or...
I've just seen it so many times, and morphing, from diversity to diversity and inclusion to EDI to DE&I. Every time people try and make this a thing, it creates an opportunity for people to try and destroy the thing. If you just work on the basis of how do I get a better culture in my organisation and how do I move things forward, then that just happens anyway.
Do you think the bubble or the balloon or whatever just got too big and then it will just kind of pop eventually? Is it one of those things that just happens and it's just like there's a cyclical sense to
it? I think it will, and I think it comes back to this point of, because people have hired people in, or the voices that you hear from aren't the ones that are actually doing the work to make organisations better. They're people who were trying to make a name for themselves by stating things loudly, or cutting, trying to cut through by having an opinion that's even more extreme or exaggerated than the one before. If someone comes along and says, well, it's actually quite complicated and it's not one big thing, it's lots of myriads of small things, and let me explain how that all works, it's very boring, and nobody really wants to listen. So I think, if that kind of false bubble bursts, then that's probably no bad thing because it doesn't actually stop the good work that's going on. I think if you saw the reverse of legislation without the replacement of it by other, you know, other more meaningful pieces of legislation, then that's when you'd start to worry. Is if you had a government or a legislation where they were going through and taking out protection for people.
Okay. So I guess the damage that would be done would be a lot mainly to the reputations of the organisations, to the kind of stickiness and engagement of the workforce. DEI, anybody who's been making a living out of DEI might find themselves struggling to find a job, particularly. I think the external consultants, a lot of them, I think, unkind people call them grifters. You know, some of them are well-meaning, some of them are good, some of them are not good, but a huge industry has grown up here, has kind of sprung up. So I think that were the biggest problems. That's another reason why I think it's crazy that they don't engage. But I think we will see that the size of that industry shrinking. I don't know what those people go on to do. So, yeah. And I think the reputational damage to businesses will come back to haunt them on some of this stuff. I think it's not been, certainly have not covered themselves in glory. Should we move on to talking about kind of what happens next then, what needs to happen? Do you think HR directors are under pressure to take charge if they're heading up an organisation that has gone deeply down this road, has rushed down and now realise they're in a muddle? I think we see these problems across sectors. What I'm sort of thinking is that the private sector will be the first to grasp the nettle, simply because I think money talks, and bad DEI or bad practice in DEI, whatever we're calling it, is bad business. And so the financial aspect of it, the profit chasing aspect of it, will be the thing that means that the corporate world, particularly, I think, sort of turns it around. I think we're already seeing some signs of that with big brands like Microsoft, Harley Davidson, and Jack Daniels seem to be repositioning themselves on their DEI pledges and policies anyway. Do you think the corporate world will be first? And do you think do we need to sort of, is grasping the nettle the right metaphor, or do we need to go back and just unpick stuff that's gone wrong? How do you see the solution?
Yeah, so I guess there's two things going on for large corporates that have made a statement in this place. One is what they've said externally, and the other thing is what they've said and done internally. And I think what you'll see externally is probably just a quiet retreat from positions, because that's what normally happens with in corporate life. In any topic, you make a big statement of intent, whether it's like you're going to expand into a country, or you're doing something around diversity and inclusion, and then you slowly just let it dissipate when it doesn't work out. So I think that's probably what you'll see, and you'll start to see, I think, a number of statements of organisations saying, we've matured on our journey, and now this is everybody's responsibility, and we need to make this part of everyday life. It shouldn't be one function or one person's role or stuff like that. That's the kind of stuff I think you'll see there. And that then crosses over to internally. I think that's where it's more problematic for organisations that have taken very firm stances, because you've probably only heard from, either the supporters of those statements or very, very brave people who are opposed to them. And I think, it's hard to see an organisation turning around and saying, we don't believe in diversity and inclusion anymore. I certainly don't see that. But I think you will see people kind of toning stuff down, maybe pivoting how they approach it and what they do. And the employee groups, you could see them being repurposed or refocused over a period of time. So all that kind of stuff, I think, will happen internally. But I think externally, it will probably be more of a quiet kind of, retreat, if you like, rather than a public statement of a change of direction, because that's equally as problematic, because you then play to another audience and not the other audience. So, So I think people just
Yeah,
cause themselves grief then.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think a good example of that is the sort of retreat from Stonewall, I think, which actually
Mm.
episode 5 was on Stonewall and how corporates appear to be shifting away from that, having realised that some of what Stonewall are promoting is iffy, divisive, not what they thought it was. So that's quite interesting. Similarly, I thought some of this, I noticed a bit of a retreat from Pride overall this year because I think they were worried that coming so soon after the cast review, it suddenly seemed to be, hang on a minute, what is this trans stuff? Have we thought this through? Are there other perspectives available on this stuff? Have we just gone with one perspective? So I just sort of saw that little bit quieter, with a little bit fewer brands, I would say, seem to have like rainbowed their logos and things like that. So yeah, so I can see that happening externally, and I'm wondering about internally whether there's a piece of work that a lot of people need to do, which is to look back and think, where has this crept into policy that may or may not be legally sound? And I think so over the last few years, particularly, if a head of DEI leaves, would that be a moment to just go back and check what have we been doing for the last couple of years? Are we sure that all that was the right decision? Maybe let's just get the lawyers to check that we've done this right. And then maybe I'm seeing a sort of reset around things like this language policing and behaviour policing, and whether I don't know, I think stuff on the pronouns is going to be tricky to unpick, but some people don't love that for all sorts of reasons, actually. People don't love that stuff. And so I think I think it's language as well. I think people being picked up on for little phrases and little things they've said is starting to feel like not the right policy. And I think some younger people have got an idea that you can like report someone to HR for using a phrase that, maybe an old fashioned phrase that is not, I don't know, something that they would love to hear or that they would use, but it's not actually anything particularly, offensive about it in itself. There's a lot around disability, actually, things like, falling on deaf ears and things like that, blind spot and just silly little things like that. I know it sounds silly, but people have just sort of been like encouraged to choose a different phrase around things like that, and just thinking, I don't want to work somewhere like this. So I wonder if there might need to be a reset around language and behaviour and what we do jump on people for and what we just let go. And we just maybe, and I wondered whether maybe on entering organisations, we could start to have a sort of charter and sort of saying, look, when you join this company, you understand you're going to have to work alongside people who might not share your views on everything. You might hear stuff that might offend you or might upset you a little bit. We'll try and figure things out between you, but we can't set this expectation that you're never going to hear anything that you don't like in the workplace. And this idea of psychological safety, I think there are two different meanings of that. One of which is you're safe to say whatever you like, and the other is you're safe to never hear anything you don't like, which seem to be two completely conflicting things for me. So I think there's a reset around some of that. Would you agree with that?
Yes, so I think this language piece has been super problematic all the way through because you have to separate action from intent in this. And someone who says, falling on deaf ears, to use that example, I can almost 100% guarantee that their intent is not to cause embarrassment or to cause discomfort for anybody. So organisations that try and overly police that just lead people to then think, I can't say anything, I mustn't do anything. But if you take a flip side of it, one of the ones you hear quite often is people saying, "Oh, I'm OCD." That was a bit OCD, wasn't it? And people who are diagnosed with OCD, rightfully kind of go, "Well, hang on a sec. That's that. What I have to experience on a daily basis isn't what you're discussing." But the organisation's responsibility in that place is to support people to have a decent conversation around it, rather than to tell people, no, don't say that, but to facilitate that understanding amongst people. And I think, this idea that you can dictate what people say and what they think it is a bit bizarre in an organisational context. I think, if people are not intentionally going out to cause harm and to say harmful things, then that's one thing. If it's clumsiness or lack of knowledge, that's entirely another thing, and it just makes you look silly as an organisation, I think, if you go too hard on that.
Or they might even think it's not even clumsy. That's just a reasonable phrase that people use, and they would like to be able to use it. And can you stop telling me what words to choose? And I will keep using that word, that phrase if I want to. I don't know. I mean, people have a different response to that. It might make them use it more if you're going to be, if you're going to get cross about it.
Yeah, and exactly, I think that's right. But here's the kind of in that is the nub of the issue, which is if someone has said, actually, when you say that really hurts me, and here's why that hurts me. Let's take OCD, because I've been diagnosed with OCD, and throughout my life, it's been a real challenge for me, and so. When you talk about it, about putting your coffee cup back in the cupboard, actually that's not quite right. And then the person goes, well, I don't really care, I'm just still going to use it. That's problematic because that's actually trying to, someone has pointed out the harm that causes and you're still continuing to do it.
Yes.
But if it's just you shouldn't use that just in case it upsets someone, I think, you are more likely to get someone saying, well, I don't agree, and I'll carry on using it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think a lot of people do feel if there is a deaf person in the room and they said falling on deaf ears, they'd probably go, oh, sorry, even, albeit I won't say that again without needing to be ticked off. But it could
exactly
be, if it's somebody doing it on behalf of people who might be offended by it, and they might even not be offended by it. I mean, a lot of people with disabilities, people with disabilities are pretty tough in my experience. And if you're going to spend your life worrying about tiny things, like they've got bigger things to worry about. And I think, I think some of that language policing can actually be quite infantilizing, they say. So they actually find it quite annoying themselves. Yeah. In terms of solutions, I would say a reset around that language stuff. I think also I would love to see more open conversations about this stuff. And I think HR people particularly, I think they're ready to start talking about it more openly. I mean, you said, I didn't let you answer the question when I asked you before about what percentage of HR directors' roles were taken up with DEI. I wonder what percentage it is now and whether that needs to increase a little bit until they've sorted this out. What percentage would you say it is now that is a typical HR director's responsibility for DEI?
I can't talk about typical, but I give you my sense is that I'd probably spend less than 1% of my time, on D&I as a thing, but if you kind of say, do I spend my time focusing on senior hires and making sure, I've got the best talented senior people in the organisation, and diversity is part of that, but it's not a explicit part of it, then it's probably more. But this comes back to this kind of fake balloon of D&I. It's not the sort of thing most HR directors are spending their time, I don't think, working on. And if they are, then I'd question what else they're not doing for their workforce. So am I focused on driving performance within my organisation? Absolutely. Am I focused on creating a culture within my organisation where people feel that they can perform to the best of their ability? Absolutely. Am I focused on making sure that pay and reward is fair? Absolutely. So you could say, well, that's D&I, but I don't see it that way. I see that just as doing good performance, good culture, and good reward.
This is turning into a philosophical discussion, Neil, about, like, what is it just a concept, or is it, I guess people would say, well, if it's just a concept, why the hell have you got a whole department? Why have you got a head of DEI? There must be head of something. Like, if it's enough of a concept to give a name to, then it must be a thing. But yeah, I totally understand what you mean, and I can see why we've got in a muddle here with it. I think one of the solutions I would like to see is more open discussion from HR people about how this is going, and I would like to see more senior people talking to each other about it. And if possible, I would like to be part of facilitating. I'm actually working on a project to bring together senior HR professionals, which you very kindly said that you're keen to hear more about as well. So I'd like to bring together senior HR professionals who are concerned about the current situation to start coming up with solutions. I haven't got all the solutions. I don't think anyone's got all the solutions, but I do think we've got ourselves into a bit of a muddle here, and I can't see a way through it other than by talking about it. And I just don't think this culture of silence is sustainable. I think people are realizing that. I think HR directors will actually start to get pressure from below as well. I mean, I've heard some early talent heads of early talent saying, I really want my HR director to step in because our head of DEI is making some really iffy decisions, and some of us are worried about them, and we don't feel we can challenge them and things like that. So I think there's actually going to be appetite from more junior and mid-level HR people, for HR directors to do more, and actually for CEOs to do more if necessary. And if there's senior representation that is going to be blocking those discussions for any reason, I think that needs to be talked about too. I mean, if there are board level people on the main board, or sort of senior champions who can be very outspoken, some of these people are very big personalities and they are difficult to challenge. And I think that puts HR directors in a tough spot, doesn't it? If you're the sensible person, I mean, I don't want to get into Severn Trent specifically, you've probably got a good relationship with all these people, but I can imagine if you're in a firm where, you're seeing people all around you that have got their own political, personal agendas, and you're thinking, I think we're on the wrong road here. You're in a tight spot, aren't you?
I mean, I think the life of an HR director is often being in a tight spot, if I'm totally honest, because the nature of people is that everybody who is a human being has a view on people, because it's the absolute nailed on example of lived experience, because people will have been an employee, they will have been a manager, so they talk about it from their own experience. But I think this comes back to data and evidence, and this is why it's really important that you're able to paint a picture based on data rather than opinion. And so coming and talking about your organisation and what's going on in your organisation, and what's going on in the communities that you're operating in, it means that you can inform those big opinions and those big views, because you've got the superpower of data and information and measurement. And that's the only way I think that you can navigate through this. Because if you just base it on opinion, then my experience is you get 3 times as many opinions as there are people in the room, and that just means that you don't go anywhere.
What would you say to HR directors who are hoping they can just ignore these problems and hope they go away? Is that a plan?
No, I don't think it is. I think I don't. It's a bit like anything in life. Stuff you ignore just comes back to bite you over time. And I think, but you need to have a vision for what you want to achieve in your organisation and what you want it to feel like. And then you need to work that back and look at what are the activities that I need to do in order to create that, rather than what is another organisation doing over there, and do I do the same as that? Because that's what then leads to things, practices in your organisation that then alienate your workforce, because you've not started with yourself, you've started with trying to compete with another organisation. And so, if you do see a massive move towards, removing D&I initiatives from organisations, just stop and ask yourself, do you want to follow that and do that? Or do you want to do some of it or none of it? What's right for you, rather than just doing what everyone else is doing. Otherwise, it's kind of running from one side of the boat to the other side of the boat and then back again, and you get the choppiness from it, don't you? So, one of the reasons I think it's not working is because too many people have had that corporate competition of, I've got to go out and hire the most vocal person in this space, because then they'll be talking about my brand. And now they're going, well, maybe I need to get rid of that person. Well, instead of just focusing on what everyone else is doing, run your own race and run your own organisation, I suppose.
Yeah, I think, to what we touched upon at the very beginning of this, what has turned out to be rather a long conversation. Thank you so much, by the way. What we touched upon with the aim of DEI should always have been about changing the culture of the organisation to make it more productive, rather than what we seem to be seeing, which is people trying to use their organisation to change the world in the way that they think is progressive, but actually others don't agree with, and that's such a crucial slide from one thing to another thing that I think has ended up creating an awful lot of problems. And like you say, people have not thought enough about their own organisation and have just followed the herd a bit.
Exactly. And I think, if you come back to what am I here to do? I'm here to help people, teams, and the organisation to perform better. Then that's always my North Star. And I would suggest that should be, every HR director's North Star, to come back to that and say, is this activity doing that? Is it helping an individual, a team, and the organisation to perform better? And if so, then it's probably right to follow that through. If it's not, then you've got to ask yourself why you're doing it.
And I think actually that spreads across to all sectors. So obviously we've talked a lot about the private sector, particularly the corporate world, but in fact that should chime for public sector and charity sector as well. That you're getting the best from your organisations. I mean, I would highlight various industries that I think are really struggling with this stuff, like the arts, universities, schools, healthcare have got really bogged down with this stuff. But actually, what I'm hearing is I think the corporate world will probably lead on this because of being motivated by profit primarily, which I don't know, 3 cheers for capitalism if it gets us out of this muddle. But I think there's an awful lot that other sectors and different industries for which it's a different type of problem they can learn from what you guys are going to do. So I'm really excited to be part of that. I think it's a really positive thing. I think let's have more conversations like this. Thank you so much. Was there anything else you wanted to chip in, or I don't know if you've enjoyed this conversation? I'm sorry I gave you a bit of a hard time, but I was doing it on behalf of other people, so I hope that's okay. You've been a good sport.
I don't feel it's a hard time at all. I think it's exactly the kind of conversations that we need to be having, and it's done respectfully, and it's done with, different perspectives and views, and that's the right way to do this. That's what we should be role modelling.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Neil. I really appreciate it. I'll let you go now. Thank you so much for your time.